have you ever looked your own child in the eyes and realized he doesn't see you as a mother anymore, just an obstacle? I'm Irene. And this is the story of the day my son asked me to sign away the only home I had left, like I was some old tenant past her time. But what he didn't know is what I found in the attic that changed everything. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below, I'd love to hear from you. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in April, the kind where the breeze slips through the window screens and the only sound is the tick of the kitchen clock. I'd just settled into my chair by the window, same spot I've sat every afternoon since Henry passed. The light was soft, slanting through the curtains, and for a moment, I remember thinking, this might just be an ordinary day. Then I heard his car in the gravel. Landon never stayed long. He had this way of showing up like a delivery man, drop off what needed dropping, pick up what needed picking, and be back in his leather seat before the engine cooled. I used to wait for those visits like a child waits for Christmas. Now I just braced myself. He didn't hug me when he walked in. Just nodded, then went straight to the kitchen table. I followed, wiping my hands on my apron. He opened his leather satchel and pulled out a thin folder. Slid it across the table like a bill. I need you to sign these, he said. I stared at the papers. There was no greeting, no how have you been, Mom? Not even a mention of the cookies I'd baked, still cooling on the counter. Just that cold manila folder and the way he said I need like it came from a place of duty, not love. What is this? I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling. It's the deed, he replied, matter of fact. I've been talking with a realtor, strictly investment, nothing personal. The market's good, and frankly, Mom, you don't need all this space. I can handle everything. You don't have to worry about the upkeep, the property taxes, any of it. Just sign, and I'll take care of the rest. He smiled like he was doing me a favor. I looked around the room. The chipped mug Henry used for his morning coffee. The photo of Landon in Little League, still crooked on the wall because I never had the heart to straighten it. My quilt in progress draped across the arm of my recliner, one patch sewn just yesterday. This is my home, I said quietly. He sighed, already growing impatient. Mom, let's be honest, you're not doing much here anymore. This house is just sitting. You're just sitting. The way he said it. Flat. Dismissive. Like I was one of those wind-up toys that had stopped ticking. Like I'd gone from mother to obstacle. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. But something in me cracked, quietly, like a floorboard warping under pressure. I laughed, just a little, because I didn't know what else to do. A sad, tired little laugh. The kind you make when someone you love says something so cruel, you start wondering if you heard them wrong. He pushed the pen toward me. I didn't take it. He rolled his eyes, muttered something under his breath about stubbornness, then stood. I'll come back when you're ready to be reasonable. I walked him to the door, not because I wanted to, but because I always had. Old habits. As he stepped outside, the sunlight caught his profile, and for a second, I saw the boy I used to read bedtime stories to. The one who used to beg me not to close the door all the way. I almost called out to him. But I didn't. He didn't turn back. The house fell quiet again, like it had been holding its breath. I walked back to my chair and sat down. The papers were still on the table, untouched. I could see my reflection faintly in the window. Pale. Still. Unmoving. Just sitting, he'd said. And I thought, is that really what I am now? Just occupying space? I folded the half-done quilt, slowly, and placed it in the wicker basket by the heater. My hands trembled a little, not from age, but from something deeper. Something like grief, but not quite. Grief has a place. This felt more like vanishing. I didn't touch the papers. I didn't call anyone. I just sat for a while, letting the silence stretch out, wrapping itself around me like a blanket I never asked for. That was the day I knew, my son, my only child, had erased me. Not from love. Not out of anger. But out of calculation. And somehow, that hurt worse than hate. The morning after Landon left with those papers still sitting on my table, I watered the potted azaleas out front like I always did. One of them had started wilting, and I found myself staring at the browning edges longer than I should have. I whispered to it, "I'm still here, at least," and realized how ridiculous that sounded, even to a dying plant. I tried to carry on with my days like nothing had shifted. Folded laundry, flipped through my Bible, even tried reading one of those mystery books the ladies at church kept passing around. But that sentence kept pressing against the edges of my mind like a sore tooth. You're just sitting. Not you're resting, not you're home. Just sitting. As if my stillness was an inconvenience. That Wednesday, I found myself in town longer than usual. The pharmacy had a new girl at the counter who didn't know what she was doing, and the grocery store ran out of my blood pressure meds. I stopped at a little cafe I hadn't visited in years, the Good Brew. It used to be quiet, tucked between a hardware store and a nail salon, with a screen door that squeaked like an old hymn. The moment I walked in, I smelled cinnamon and something else, vanilla maybe. It wrapped around me like a memory I didn't know I'd forgotten. I ordered a tea and was reaching for my purse when I heard a voice say, "I've got that." I turned and nearly dropped my wallet. It was Delia. Her hair was shorter now, darker too, but her eyes hadn't changed. That soft, steady blue. She was wearing an apron and holding a tray of muffins. "Hi, Mom," she said, then caught herself. "Sorry." That just slipped out. I smiled, surprised by how quickly tears rose in my throat. "You don't have to apologize for that." We sat in the corner booth. It was awkward at first, how could it not be? I hadn't seen her in almost 2 years, not since the divorce. Landon made sure of that. She asked about my health, and I asked about hers. She told me she worked part-time at the library and filled in at the cafe a few afternoons a week. Said she was doing okay. I didn't press. We both knew okay could mean 100 things. "I still have the snow globe," she said suddenly. "The one you gave me for Christmas that year, it plays Silent Night. It broke once, but I glued it back together." I nodded, remembering the gift, the wrapping paper with tiny cardinals, the look on her face when she opened it. She'd cried then too, but happy tears. That had been their last Christmas together. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out something small. A card, faded at the edges. "I don't know if you remember this," she said, "but you sent it after everything happened. Christmas, the year after. I didn't think you would." I took it gently. My handwriting was shaky. The card had a red ribbon on it and a verse from Isaiah. Inside, I'd written, "You're still family to me. Always will be." Delia looked down. "I put this on the fridge for months. It was the only thing that made me feel like I hadn't been completely erased." That word, erased, struck something deep in me. Because that was exactly how I'd felt, sitting in my own home, hearing my son explain how little I mattered now. She reached for her tea, tried to act casual, but her voice wavered. "I just wanted you to know it meant something." "Still does." I didn't know what to say at first. I just sat there, looking at this young woman who had been my daughter in every way that counted, even if the papers said otherwise. "You know," I finally said, "I used to think family was what you're born into. Bloodlines and names and who signs what document. But lately, I think it might just be who shows up. And stays." She nodded slowly, her eyes glossy. "I never stopped thinking of you as my mom. There was a long pause, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. Just honest. When I got home that afternoon, I took that folded deed off the table and tucked it in the drawer with my electric bill and grocery coupons. Not because I had a plan yet. Not because I knew what I was going to do. But because for the first time in a long time, someone had reminded me that being seen, really seen, was still possible. And that maybe, just maybe, I was more than someone who was just sitting. It was nearly 3 weeks later when I heard the knock. Not the kind of knock that says, "I came to see how you're doing," or "I brought soup." No, it was firm, impatient, clipped. I peeked through the side window and saw Landon standing on the porch in a pressed gray suit, next to a man I didn't recognize. Briefcase in hand. Tie too tight for a Saturday morning. I opened the door slowly. "Hi, Mom," Landon said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "This is Charles Menlay. He's been helping me sort through some legal matters." I stepped back, more out of habit than welcome. The lawyer gave me a polite nod and a tight smile, then followed Landon into the living room. He looked around like he was appraising everything. I hated how that made me feel. We sat down, the three of us, in that room that still smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. Landon didn't waste time. "We've been talking," he began, smoothing his tie, "and we think it's time to move forward with some decisions regarding the house." I didn't say anything. I waited. Charles spoke next, formal and rehearsed. "Your son is concerned about the long-term management of this property, given your age and current living situation. To prevent potential legal complications down the line, he's requesting you sign over primary ownership so the estate can be protected and properly developed." "Developed?" I asked. Landon leaned in a little, lowering his voice like we were conspiring. "It's not personal, Mom. It's just smart. This place could be subdivided, sold for a good return. It's an asset. We shouldn't let it sit like a museum." I looked at him. Really looked at him. His jaw was tight, hands clasped like he was negotiating with a client, not speaking to the woman who birthed him. He didn't even notice I hadn't offered coffee. I always offered coffee. "I live here," I said quietly. "I know," he replied. "But you won't forever." That one stung. He said it like it was fact. Like he was already preparing the obituary. He went on to talk about legacy, about how Grandpa Whitlow always intended this house to go to the next generation. He said I was holding on to something that should have been passed down by now. That I was, in his words, stalling progress. Progress. I sat still, watching the dust float in the slant of sunlight across the floor. The same floor Henry and I had laid together when we couldn't afford contractors. We'd spent an entire weekend laughing, arguing about whether the grain should run north-south or east-west. "Do you remember what your father said about this place?" I asked Landon, still staring at the floor. He blinked. "Dad wanted me to have it eventually." I shook my head. "No." He said, "This is the house I want to die in. This is our soil." That was after he found out about the cancer. We were sitting right here. Landon exhaled sharply. "Mom, I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm trying to make sure what's ours doesn't go to waste." Charles cleared his throat and slid a slim folder onto the table. "You can take time to review this. There's no rush, of course, but we'd recommend finalizing the transfer before the end of the quarter to avoid complications." They stood. Just like that. Business concluded. "I'll think about it," I said. Landon kissed the air near my cheek, then followed Charles out without another word. When the door clicked shut, the quiet returned. But it wasn't peaceful, it was hollow. Like someone had taken a big scoop out of the air. I picked up the folder, turned it over in my hands. It felt heavier than it should have. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked into the bedroom and pulled out the old shoebox where I kept Henry's things. Cards, notes, the key to the shed he used to keep locked even though there was nothing worth stealing in it. I unfolded one of the letters he'd written me when he was away on business years ago. At the bottom, he'd scribbled, "Don't ever let them treat our home like a transaction. You're the heart of it, Reenie. That's why it matters." I read that line twice. Then again. And something in me, something small and quiet, settled into place. Was I being selfish, like Landon said? Maybe. But then again, maybe I was finally learning to stop giving pieces of myself away just because someone asked. I placed the letter back in the box, tucked the folder into a kitchen drawer, and sat down with a cup of tea. It started with a creak. Not the kind that makes you nervous, just the kind that reminds you things are older than they used to be. I was looking for the sewing tin, thought it might have rolled under something, and ended up staring at the attic pull cord like it had whispered my name. I hadn't been up there in years. The steps groaned under my feet as I climbed, and dust hung thick in the air like memory. It smelled like cedar and mothballs, and something sweeter, maybe the remnants of that old vanilla sachet I tucked into a box when Henry passed. I don't know what made me open the blue trunk in the corner, the one with the brass latches that stuck every time. But I did. Underneath a faded quilt and some yellowed baby clothes was our old family Bible. It was heavy in my hands. Leather-bound. The pages were soft from years of turning. Inside were birthdays, anniversaries, baptisms, written in my best handwriting. And there, near the back, in Henry's distinct, blocky print, was a verse he'd underlined before he got sick. "You are fearfully and wonderfully made." Psalm 139 verse 14. There was a note beside it. Just one line. "Don't ever let this world convince you otherwise." I sat down on the wooden floor, right there in the dim light, and let the words breathe. Something about the quiet, the dust motes floating like flecks of grace, it made the verse settle deeper than it had in years. I hadn't realized how far I'd wandered from it, not just the scripture, but the belief behind it. That I was made with purpose. With care. That I wasn't some shell taking up space in a house too big for one person. Landon's voice came back to me, "You're just sitting." I pressed the book against my chest and stayed there a long time. I wasn't crying, but it felt like something inside me had shifted, like a beam that had been sagging for years had finally straightened. The next morning was Sunday. I hadn't gone to Grace Fellowship in over a month, but I found myself putting on my dress with the little blue flowers, the one Henry always said made me look like spring showed up early. I parked in the gravel lot and slipped into a back pew. The sanctuary still smelled of lemon oil and old hymnals. The sermon that day was about boundaries. Not walls, the pastor said, but fences with gates. Love that protects, not imprisons. He said, setting limits isn't betrayal, it's stewardship. Of your heart. Of your peace. I didn't know a sermon could feel like a mirror. After the final prayer, I lingered. People filed out slow, shaking hands, chatting about potlucks and grandkids. I stepped outside into the morning sun, thinking I'd head straight home. But Delia was waiting by my car. She looked nervous, wringing her hands like she was about to apologize for something she hadn't done. "Hey," she said softly. "I didn't mean to ambush you. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For showing up at the cafe like that. I know it might have stirred things up." I shook my head. "Don't apologize. I'm glad I saw you." She glanced down at the gravel. "I heard about the legal stuff. Landon's been talking to a few people. Said he might have to liquidate some assets," his words. I tensed. Delia looked up at me, her face pinched with concern. "I didn't mean to pry. I just thought, you should know. He's in pretty deep with some loans." The cafe owner said he's been trying to borrow against future listings. Honestly, I think he's desperate. The words didn't shock me. They just clicked into place, like the final puzzle piece that makes the whole picture ugly and clear. This wasn't about legacy. Or convenience. Or even family. I was his safety net. He wasn't just discarding me, he was banking on me. On this house. On what it could be worth once I was out of the way. Delia stepped closer. I'm sorry if I crossed a line. I thought you deserved the truth. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't just Landon's ex-wife anymore. She was someone who'd been used, discarded, and still had the decency to show up and warn me. Thank you, I said. She smiled, a little sad, a little hopeful. You're still mom to me, you know. No matter what the papers say. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. As I drove home, the Bible sat on the passenger seat beside me. I glanced over at it once, running my fingers across the worn cover. Fearfully and wonderfully made. I repeated it to myself, like armor. Not forgotten. Not useless. Not just sitting. And not for sale. The days after that Sunday moved slow, like syrup in January. I kept waiting to feel certain about something, about anything. But certainty doesn't always show up when you want it to. Sometimes it creeps in, inch by inch, or not at all. I kept going over it in my head, Landon's visit, the lawyer's tone, Delia's warning. And I kept asking myself the same question, over and over, if he really is in trouble, doesn't that make it my job to help him? That's what mothers do, right? We show up. We give and give. Even when they don't say thank you. Even when it hurts. Even when we're afraid. But every time I thought about handing over that deed, another thought shoved its way in, he's not asking. He's expecting. Like it's owed to him. Like I'm just a vault waiting to be cracked open. That night, I took a walk around the house. Not a long one, just from the kitchen to the back porch, across the hall where Henry used to keep his boots, and down the narrow strip by the dining room where the floor creaks no matter how light you step. I ran my fingers along the picture frames, birthdays, graduations, a family barbecue from '92. All frozen moments of a life that had once felt full. Now, they looked like decorations in a waiting room. I stood by the screen door for a while, listening to the crickets. Thinking about what Landon had said. Not his words exactly, but the way he said them. So clean. So cold. You won't live here forever. Not cruel. Just clinical. Like I was a ticking clock in a house he'd already redrawn on blueprints. The next morning, I went to see Pastor Ray. Not for prayer. Not for wisdom. I just needed to say something out loud that had been eating at me like rust. He met me in his office, offered me sweet tea, and sat with that quiet patience that made him such a good listener. I didn't tell him everything. Just enough. I think I've taught my son the wrong kind of love, I said, staring at a water stain on the carpet. I taught him love had no limits. That a mother's love is supposed to stretch until it snaps. I thought that made me good. Noble, even. He didn't interrupt. But what if I taught him that I don't get to have boundaries? That loving someone means letting them take what they want, when they want it. I looked up. He doesn't ask. He takes. And when I pause, when I breathe too long, he calls me unreasonable. Pastor Ray leaned back in his chair. It sounds like you've spent a long time protecting him from consequences. I nodded. I thought that was what mothers were supposed to do. He smiled gently. We're supposed to protect our children. But we're also supposed to show them what love looks like with dignity. Sometimes, dignity means saying no. That word, dignity, sat heavy in my chest. like something I'd lost without realizing it. Later that afternoon, I got the mail. There was a thick envelope with a law firm's return address. My hands didn't shake when I opened it. Not yet. But when I saw what it was, petition for conservatorship, I sat down right there on the front steps. Landon had filed a claim in probate court. Said I was no longer mentally fit to manage my own affairs. That I was displaying cognitive inconsistencies. That I'd repeatedly resisted sound financial advice. His words. Or maybe the lawyer's. It didn't matter. I wasn't just a burden anymore. I was a liability. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat with it. Let it settle. Let it hurt. I thought about how many years I'd carried him, through scraped knees, broken hearts, failed businesses. I remembered the way he used to climb into bed with me when he had bad dreams. How he'd call me his safe place. Now, I was paperwork. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen in my hand, the Bible next to me. I didn't even open it, I just wanted to feel the weight of it. Something solid. Something not up for negotiation. And I thought, if I don't protect myself now, no one will. If I don't show him that I am more than a name on a deed, I'll disappear entirely. That was the night I stopped being afraid of being just a mother. Because I realized, finally, that being a mother didn't mean disappearing to prove my love. It took me 3 days to find Hank Wilmer's number. I finally spotted it scribbled on the back of an old Christmas card, tucked inside Henry's toolbox in the shed. The handwriting was his, loopy and rushed, like always. I stared at it for a long time before I picked up the phone. Hank answered on the second ring. "Wilmer Law," he said, his voice low and warm, just like I remembered. "It's Irene," I said. "I need a favor. A quiet one." 2 days later, I was sitting across from him in a tiny office that smelled like cedar and pipe tobacco. Nothing much had changed. Same cracked window panes, same desk with drawers that stuck. There was a framed picture of his late wife behind him and a jar of peppermints he never touched. Hank didn't ask why I'd come. He just waited. I looked down at my folded hands. "I want to rewrite my will. And I need to transfer the house. Effective immediately." His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "To Delia Monroe," I said. That got a pause. "Landon's ex-wife?" I nodded. "She's the only one who hasn't tried to gut me for what I have left." He didn't speak for a while. He just leaned back in his chair, hands steepled. Then he said, "You sure about this?" "More sure than I've been about anything in years." He pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer. "All right then." It took an hour. He explained what I'd need to sign, what it would mean legally. There were technical words I stopped hearing after a while. I just kept watching the rain streak across the dusty glass, blurring the view of the parking lot. Somewhere behind me, his assistant was typing slowly. The only sound besides the clock ticking. When it was done, he placed the documents in a manila envelope and slid it toward me. "I'll file the deed change tomorrow." "But Irene," he said gently, "this will create noise." "I'm not worried about noise," I said. "I've been quiet long enough." Before I left, I sat in my car with the heater blowing warm air on my feet and wrote a letter on the back of an old grocery list I found in my purse. It wasn't planned. It just came out. I folded it neatly, slipped it into the envelope with the papers, and drove across town to Delia's little rental house near the elementary school. Her porch light was off. I didn't knock. Just slid the envelope into her mailbox and walked away. In the letter, I wrote, "Dear Delia, I don't have much left that people haven't tried to take. But this house isn't just a roof or a piece of land. It's where Henry laughed, and where Landon learned to walk, and where I once believed love could last longer than silence. You're not blood. But you never made me feel like a burden. So I'm leaving it to you, not as repayment, and not as pity. Just because you stayed. Take care of it. Or let it go. That's your choice now. Love? Mom, if I can still call myself that. On the way home, I felt something between grief and peace. Like turning off a light in a room you'll never walk into again. I knew Landon would find out. I imagined the phone calls, the threats, maybe worse. But none of it scared me anymore. Delia didn't need the house. That was the truth of it. She'd never asked for anything. But I wanted her to have it because she treated it like it meant something. And me, too. That night, I sat on the porch and listened to the wind scrape against the old shutters. It sounded like breathing. I held my cup of tea close, steam warming the tip of my nose, and whispered something out into the dark. Not a prayer. Not exactly. But maybe something close. A release. He didn't knock this time. I was in the kitchen steeping tea when I heard the front door fly open, hard enough to rattle the coat hooks. Landon's voice hit the walls before I even turned around. You gave it away? You actually gave it away. He stood in the middle of the hallway, fists clenched, a letter in one hand, the court's notice. His face was red, eyes wild like I hadn't seen since he was 15 and got benched during homecoming. Delia? Seriously? That woman? After everything he stopped himself, but not really. You transferred the deed? Without even telling me? I walked over to the sink and set my mug down carefully. My hands didn't shake this time. You told me I wasn't doing much anymore, I said, turning to face him. So I did something. He stared at me, stunned for a half-second, as if he hadn't expected me to speak. As if he came prepared for a crying mother, or a confused old woman, or a shell. I wasn't any of those. You don't get to just, he stammered. That house was supposed to be mine. We talked about this. You knew I needed it. No, I said, evenly. You never asked. You assumed. There's a difference. He held up the letter like it was proof of betrayal. You blindsided me. You didn't even have the decency to warn me. You went behind my back like you went to court behind mine? That shut him up for a beat. He dropped the letter onto the hall table and ran a hand through his hair. You don't get it, he muttered. I've been under pressure. You think I want to come here, beg for scraps from my own mother? I'm drowning, Mom. I've been drowning for years, and you? You used me, I said. Not loud, but final. He flinched. You used Delia. You used me. You've been burning bridges while expecting someone else to carry you across the water. And I let you. For too long. He paced the floor like a caged animal. I was trying to build something. I was trying to take care of things before it got worse. It's already worse, I said. You just didn't expect me to notice. He turned to me then, anger fading into something uglier, disbelief. You gave it to her? You think she deserves it more than your own son? I didn't move. She never treated me like an object. Or a burden. Or a vault to be emptied. She sat with me when I was sick. She called on Christmas. She stayed. He laughed bitterly. Unbelievable. You're going to throw your own flesh and blood out for a woman who signed divorce papers. No, I said, quieter now. I'm drawing a line. You don't have to like it. But you'll respect it. Landon took a step toward me, face twitching like he was searching for the right words, or maybe just any words that could break through. You're gonna regret this, he said. When you're old and alone? I already was. That landed harder than I meant it to. We stood there in the silence. He blinked. For once, I saw a flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe realization, but it was gone as fast as it came. Replaced by that cold, sharp thing I didn't recognize anymore. You made your choice, he said. Don't call me when it bites you. He turned toward the door. I followed him. Not in anger. Not in sadness. Just to close it behind him. He muttered something under his breath as he walked out, something half-formed and venomous. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I stood in the doorway as he got in his car. The engine roared, but he didn't peel out. He just drove, slower than I expected. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I closed the door before he was even out of the driveway. No tears. No shaking. Just a soft click as the latch caught, and the quiet that followed. I leaned my back against the wood, looked around my home, no longer something to defend, but something I had already let go. For once, it didn't feel like a defeat. It felt like a beginning. The house felt different after Landon left. It wasn't in the walls or the furniture, those were the same. It was in the quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask for anything. That doesn't press on your chest or make your stomach knot up when the phone rings. I sat on the porch with my tea, same as always, but something had changed. The tension that used to live in my shoulders was gone. I wasn't waiting anymore, for him to call, to show up, to come to his senses. I wasn't rehearsing arguments in my head. I wasn't apologizing to the air. I was still. And I was okay. I looked out over the yard, the porch steps Henry had rebuilt twice because he hated the way they creaked. The wind played with the edges of the old welcome mat. For the first time in years, this place didn't feel like something I was trying to defend. It felt like mine. I whispered to no one, I didn't lose my son. I just stopped pretending he was still the boy who used to love me. A week passed. The sun rose and set. I baked a pie for no reason at all. I took longer walks. I even dusted off the old hymnal and hummed through pages I hadn't touched in a decade. Then one afternoon, Delia came. She didn't knock right away. I saw her through the window, standing on the porch with an envelope in her hand, just holding it like it weighed too much. When I opened the door, her eyes were red and swollen. But she smiled. I got your letter, she said softly. I nodded, stepping aside. I figured you would. She sat at the kitchen table and slid the envelope toward me. I wrote back. I didn't know what else to do. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was neat, careful. She wrote about Micah, about how he still asked about Grandpa Henry when he saw old pictures. She wrote about the lilac bush in her backyard that wouldn't bloom. About how the silence in her rental house sometimes felt like being underwater. And then she wrote, I can't accept the house. But I also can't say no. Because it's the only place I ever felt like I truly belonged. When I looked up, Delia was wiping her eyes. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Stay, I said. She let out a shaky breath. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything. That night, we sat on the porch with Micah between us, his legs swinging off the step. He told me about school, his teacher's silly earrings, the worm he found on the playground. When he yawned, Delia scooped him up and carried him inside. I stayed out there, listening to the crickets and watching the porch light flicker on. A few weeks later, I packed a suitcase and moved into their house, our house, I suppose. Just a few rooms, nothing fancy, but warm. Delia made space in the closet. Micah made space in his heart. Each morning, I helped him water the flowers. He'd point to the biggest bloom and say, "This one's yours, Grandma." And every now and then, he'd look up at me and ask, "Are we a real family?" And I'd say, "Yes, baby." The kind that chooses to stay. One Sunday, Pastor Ray invited me to speak at the women's group. Nothing formal. Just a few words about finding peace. I didn't have a script. I just stood there in that circle of folding chairs and said, I used to think God wanted me to forgive without limit. But I've learned He doesn't ask us to stay where we're not seen. He asks us to love, yes, but not at the cost of our worth. There was a long pause after. Then someone handed me a tissue. I hadn't even realized I'd been crying. That evening, I walked out onto the porch again. This one didn't have Henry's steps. It didn't creak the same. But it felt just as safe. I reached over and turned on the porch light. When Henry was alive, we always left it on. For neighbors. For Landon. For anyone who might need a place to land. I left it on that night, too. But not because I was waiting. I left it on for me. For the woman who finally came home to herself. For the family we chose. I don't wait by windows anymore. But the light still shines. You know, I'm not as strong as I used to be. My knees creak, my hands don't always cooperate, but somehow, my heart feels lighter than it has in years. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't letting go of others, it's letting go of the version of ourselves that kept waiting to be chosen, to be loved right. I don't know if you've ever had to draw a line with someone you gave everything to, but if you have, I hope you know it doesn't make you cruel. It makes you brave. Have you ever had to protect your peace from someone you loved? If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll join me again next time. I'll be here, with a cup of tea and a porch light on.